This is Jim Williams with the Hurricane City Tropical Update for July 19th, 8 p.m. Here's the tracking map from the front page of Hurricane City, and you can see we have a new Invest 97L just north of Puerto Rico, and the system is tangled with an upper level low, and development is unlikely for the next few days, and as you can see, there's nothing else of any concern in the Atlantic Basin. The National Hurricane Center graphical outlook shows a 20% chance for the system north of Puerto Rico and 0% chance for the system in the western Caribbean Sea. Now, the other day I thought this had a pretty decent chance of developing because it had a high pressure aloft and lower pressures overall, but it's tangling with another upper level low just like Invest 97L is. Here's a close-up of our system. And you can see that it's moved generally just north of due west over the last 24 hours and is now just north of Puerto Rico. And let me go ahead and show you a close-up of the radar from Puerto Rico. And you can see there's a bit of a rotation here, but it's probably up in the mid-levels of the atmosphere because there's no west winds or southerly winds on the island of Puerto Rico. All the winds are light and out of the east down there. So if anything, maybe this is a very tight, small circulation, or it's up in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. Right, here are the models on our system, and you can see we have the BAM represented here, and the no gaps are indicating this is going to be a general west track, which I do agree with. The National Hurricane Center track is the white track here, and that shows this as a tropical storm making landfall near South Florida in a few days from now. But that track is unlikely because there's a ridge of high pressure that's going to be building in over Bermuda, and that's going to prevent this from coming into South Florida more than likely. Now, what are the other models saying? Well, the European model, one of the more reliable models, is taking this right over Cuba and into the Gulf of Mexico just north of the Yucatan and not developing this very much at all. The North American mesoscale model takes this generally just north of Cuba and into the eastern Gulf of Mexico and develops it very slowly. The Canadian model is very interesting. It takes it right over Hispaniola south of Cuba and then bends it to the northwest into the eastern Gulf of Mexico where it turns it into a hurricane. And the UK Met, again, the UK Met is wanting to build a ridge of high pressure here and send the flow generally off to the west in the Gulf of Mexico. So the chances of this coming into Florida are pretty slim, as most of the models have this going over the Greater Antilles and into the Gulf of Mexico. Now here are the intensity forecast from the Weather Underground maps, and you can see that the ship's model turns this into a minimal hurricane here in about 5 days from now in the Gulf of Mexico. The IVCN model has this as a tropical storm in 5 days, and the HWRF keeps this very weak, around 25 to 30 miles an hour in about 5 to 6 days. And I kind of agree with that scenario because it's going to be tangling with all the mountains of Cuba and Hispaniola. In fact, the GFDL model does not develop this very much at all either. So the GFDL and the HWRF keep this very, very weak. Now here's the colored water vapor loop from NOAA, and you can see our two upper level lows that are disrupting development of our systems. Here's the first one out here, and that's causing westerly wind shear around 30 to 40 knots all through the Greater Antilles, and that's going to really disrupt development of this system, not to mention the land masses, and that's why there's only a 20% chance of development with this system. Now, this area here in the western Caribbean Sea is tangling with this upper level low right here in the Gulf of Mexico, and the outflow from that, along with the high pressure being centered just to the west of the system, is kind of blowing the clouds off to the southeast of the axis of this wave, which is right in here. So this is having trouble developing at all, and there's a 0% chance of development, at least for the next few days, on the system in the western Caribbean Sea. You know, one more thing I wanted to know, what's kind of interesting about this, if you use your imagination here, there's two eyeballs here, and some whiskers in here, and here's the mouth down in here, and we have ourselves a cat face on the screen here. I just thought that was interesting. I noticed that when I was watching the animation a few times. It looks like a cat face on the screen. You can do all kinds of imaginations with these satellite loops. Anyway, back to the upper level winds. This is what the outlook is from the GFS in 48 hours. Again, 25 to 30 knots just north of the developing system 97L. So it's not a very favorable situation at all. Meanwhile, over here it's going to be a little bit more favorable for the system in the western Caribbean Sea. So we need to keep our eyes on that system in the western Caribbean. Now here are the pressures in the Caribbean Sea. Again, up where our system is, 1013, 1014 millibars, not very favorable for development. Meanwhile, over here in the Western Caribbean, 1011 and 1010 millibars, which is lower pressure. You need to have around 1010, 1011 millibars to start getting concerned about a tropical system developing at the surface. So this system looks a little more promising as far as pressures for development, and this system has a little bit of too much of high pressure for development, at least in the short term. Here's the steering flow from SIMS. And again, you can see generally east to west through and into the Gulf of Mexico. So that's what we're going to be watching for over the coming days, is this going south of Florida and into the Gulf. Now what's happening out in the East Atlantic? We have a strong wave right here. The axis is around 30 west, but all the convection is to the south, and the mid-level circulation is up around 12 degrees north, but it's wrapped in dry air, and I'll show you that image in just a minute. Here's a very strong wave over Africa. That's going to be out over the water in about 3 or 4 days, and that's something we're going to have to watch going into the weekend. We might see some development finally out in the East Atlantic. But here's the dry air, the African Sahara air, and you notice all the reds out here. This is dry air wrapping into this tropical wave around 30 west, and that's not going to allow development as it continues to wrap dry air into it. Well, that's it for now. We'll continue to monitor Invest 97L on the map at Hurricane City, and you can too. Also, the HurricaneCity.tv feed continues to monitor the webcams from the Gulf of Mexico, monitoring the oil spill. There's still indications that there's leaks out there, so they may have to open that up over the next few days. So things are going to continue to be interesting out there in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. That's it for now. I'll be back with another update in a day or two on this situation. Thank you again for visiting Hurricane City.